relationships. And this one day in Saskatoon, next Tuesday, there'll be one panel for psychologists and counselors and social workers, another one for lawyers, mediators, financial pros, and then the evening will be an open to the general public night. And it's only $10 a person. You can get the tickets at Pick-A-Tick. And it's all about the questions of how you deal with co-parenting through separation. What do you tell kids? How do the members of the couple conduct themselves? We find Gary Dernfeld in Dundas, Ontario this morning. Gary, welcome and thanks for taking our call.
John, I so appreciate you inviting me onto your show to talk about this. Thank you.
Now, when we talk about co-parenting, obviously the interests of the children are what the couple should be putting forward, but that sounds easy. I'm thinking it's not quite that easy.
Oh, if only it were that easy. Our feelings always get the best of us, and in view of our feelings, judgment goes out the window. So as you and I, John, are going through our horrific divorce, and you've done this to me and I've done that to you, we have resentment towards each other. And resentment often breeds, retribution. I want to get back at you. And while we don't always recognize it, sometimes we put the children in that middle of that retribution. I can withhold the kids. I can use the kids to pass messages. I can say bad things to the child about the other parent. So I can disparage the other parent to the child. So these are misguided ways, poor judgment ways of dealing with the upset and anger between you and I.
Is there an approach when the couple has made that choice to be separate, whether there's a divorce imminent or they're going to spend some time apart, how do they set up that telling of the children and then kind of establishing the ground rules for how it's going to be?
You know what? I can't tell you how many radio interviews I've done. You're the first person who's ever asked me that. It is a brilliant question. Because it is, John, because it speaks to how do we do this right versus muck it up, and have to clean up after the fact. So there is a right way for parents to tell their children, we're no longer going to live together, we're going to separate. And the way to do that is for parents, before they meet with their kids, to agree on what we call a joint narrative. Fancy language, it just means, what's our story?
I was going to say, getting your story straight and sticking to it.
So we get our story straight. And so we have to decide in advance how we're going to tell the children. And the most important aspect to that story is that neither parent should be thrown under the bus. If I may, children, they look up to their mummies and daddies, or if it's a same-sex couple, to their parents, and they say, I'm half of this parent, I'm half of that parent. That forms all of me. And the degree to which one parent is made to look bad in the eyes of the child internalizes that and then says, well, which half of me is bad? And then if both parents do that, then the child looks at him or herself and says, all of me must be bad. Well, what does that do for a child's sense of self-esteem? If all of me is bad, then nothing I do matters. So in this joint narrative, in the getting our story straight, it doesn't include anything bad about either parent. So the story is typically children, mommy and daddy no longer get along. We don't love each other in the way that mommies and daddies should. But just to let you know, children, while a love for a mommy and daddy can change between themselves, it can't change between a daddy and a son, or between a mommy and a son or a daughter. We both still love you. And so that is the message we have to convey to the children, and to do so in a way that the child feels no sense of responsibility for the demise of the parental relationship, or no sense of responsibility to manage the parental relationship.
Boy, that's a great point, because isn't it so often with the kids, they even worry that maybe something they did caused this?
Absolutely. You know, I'm 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, and I've got my own magical thinking. I don't want my parents typically to separate, and I think, what could I do differently? If only I got better grades, there'd be less to argue about. If only I didn't want to go to hockey, there'd be less discussions about finances. So from so many perspectives, a child may look to themselves and their own behavior and choices and worry that it was contributory to their parents' relationship's demise. We don't want that on their shoulders. It's not their responsibility.
Gary Dernfeld is a Dundas, Ontario-based social worker. A great website called yoursocialworker.com. He's in Saskatchewan, actually doing a full one day in Saskatoon next Tuesday at TCU Place. And what's really cool, I thought, was knowing the number of law firms and lawyers I do, tons of good members of the family bar sponsoring you coming in, which I think is a good sign, whether it's collaborative family law, whether it's just members of the family bar. This is a good thing for lawyers and counselors to get involved in.
I got to tell you, to me, it's very impressive when we see lawyers who are marketing to the same crowd. They're in competition with each other, yet they are collaborating to bring me in, and it speaks to them being very reasonable people, that they're not out to make a buck on your misery, but they want to find strategies to help you best resolve your situation as peacefully as possible. And so, yeah, you know, whether it's Miller Thompson, WMCZ, Wardell, there's several others. You know, and they're all on the flyer, by the way. I encourage your listeners to go to my website because you can get the link to the flyer for the workshop. My true appreciation goes out to this group of lawyers and also some financial professionals. When we think of separating parents, John, it's not just the emotional side. Yes, you know, that's a huge piece to that, and I bring that to the table. But parents also have to sort out their holdings, their assets, child support, at times spousal support. And so there's also something called, you know, a financial divorce specialist. And so these are people who have the financial acumen to also help separating parents figure out that aspect of their divorce. And these people have also joined in for this workshop.
Gary Dernfeld's with us. Gary, can you hang on for a minute?
Absolutely.
When we get back, we're going to talk more about some of the transition. Gary Dernfeld with us in his base in Dundas, Ontario. 1-877-332-8255. Abigail in Regina, you have a question for Gary on escalation of feelings.
I do. I'm not married, have never been. I'm not a parent, but I am a child of divorce. I know that social workers are very often involved in supervised access, and I'm just wondering, how should a parent avoid the escalation? What steps can they take? And as a social worker, what do you believe is the biggest mistake these parents make in custody battles that cause it to get to that point of animosity?
Right. So, you know, by the time you're looking at a separation or a divorce, clearly there's a lot of water under the bridge in animosity. That animosity and upset can actually be fueled by the choice of lawyer. So if you go to somebody whose disposition is towards marching things to court, you got to know that may be a race to the bottom in and of itself. That will escalate, because when you march to court, you're going to write these nasty affidavits that say the other parent is this such and so, and you got to know that that's going to provoke a return where, you know, that parent is now going to say disparaging things about you. So when you choose your lawyers, please choose lawyers whose disposition is more towards being conciliatory and sorting things out rather than throwing the other parent on under the bus and only seeking to win. Parents, if you cannot get along with your ex, sometimes just showing up to the party is enough to set off conflict. If that is your situation, then do work with an intermediary. Now, there are various kinds or types of intermediaries. One type is through something called collaborative family law. So these are lawyers who are trained to help you settle things through conciliatory approaches. You can probably Google Collaborative Family Law Saskatoon or Regina and come up with those lawyers who practice that way in your community. These are persons who will sit round table with you, the other parent and the other lawyer, to help settle things. If not collaborative attorneys, then consider a mediator. So this is a neutral third party who is there to keep things civil and safe to facilitate the discussion. Now, not everyone needs even collaborative lawyers or a mediator. It may be that if you use your clergy, if you belong to a faith group, it may be that you can use a family member or a loved one. So sometimes we need to bring in a third party to keep it civil between us. The other thing to keep in mind is one's own use of language. If we only go into our meetings blaming and pointing fingers, very little comes of that. Whereas if we go in taking responsibility for our own contribution to distress and say, you know what, I recognize things went wrong between us. I know that I acted this way and that way. For that, I apologize. I hope we can move on. That facilitates the repairing of a relationship. Is that helpful?
That's great advice. Is part of it even the inner voice? You know, the idea that this child or these children are, who I love more than myself, and even though I've been hurt, I'm angry, I'm everything else, I am simply never going to allow them to see that anger or that hurt. Is it even as simple as that, just the discipline among yourself?
Absolutely. Justice Harvey Brownstone, a Toronto judge, in his book, Tug of War, he writes, you have to love your children more than you hate your ex. Right? Brilliant. Brilliant. Love your children more than you hate your ex. Advance the needs of your children over your animosity. And that's the challenge when we have hurt each other through the demise of our relationship.
Gary Dernfeld is with us, social worker, author, and his website, it's a great one to check out, a lot of helpful stuff, yoursocialworker.com. Ken in Regina, you're on with Gary Dernfeld.
I guess my comment is very similar to what he said about loving your kid more than you hate your ex, because if I didn't, there's definitely some animosity and all the rest, but yeah, I kind of just look at it as I got a wonderful little kid out of the deal, and yeah, everything went bad and I lost a lot and everything, but I got a kid out of the deal.
Beautiful. And the other strategy, it's not just how we manage our behavior. If we are confronted with untoward behavior from our former partner, we have to look at what we do with that. And for this, I always draw from former Prime Minister John Chrétien. He was a Teflon Prime Minister. You can throw anything against that guy, and it just wouldn't stick. The news reporter would say, Prime Minister Chrétien, the right honorable member of the opposition called you a this and a that, and he'd simply say, well, some people call me those things, some people call me other things, and that would be it. He just fell flat. So parents, if you're on the receiving end of that barrage, don't personalize it. Don't think you have to defend yourself, and certainly don't give back in kind. Let it fall flat. It takes the weight out of it.
Gary Dernfeld with us. He is the guy who is being brought in by a lot of the collaborative family lawyers, counselors, financial companies, and others. They're doing workshops next week, but the public part of this is 7 to 9 Tuesday of next week, Saskatoon. You can get all the ticket info at pickatick.com, or you can even see more at Gary's website, yoursocialworker.com. Gary, last word to you. If there's one bit of advice, the couple has made the decision to separate, what do they do now before they sit down with the kids?
Just recognize that when we look at the outcome of children of separated parents, the predictor for their well-being over time has nothing to do with the parenting plan. It hasn't to do with how much time the child lives with that or the other parent, or even the choice of school. The best predictor for the outcome of children of separated parents is parental conflict. So anything that you can do to mitigate or ratchet down parental conflict is going to serve your children's long-term interest.
Gary, great spending time today. A delight meeting you. I've followed your work over the years. Let's chat again sometime, and safe travels into Saskatchewan.
Thanks ever so much. A very quick note. My grandfather operated one of the two general stores in Wynyard, Saskatchewan from the 1920s to 1960s.
Really?
Yeah.
Gee, somebody else across Canada with roots in Saskatchewan.
There you go.
Gary Dernfeld with us. Great spending time. He'll